I'm Michael Lane. I'm the president of Liftport Group. We have been doing space research of different kinds and different flavors for pretty close to 20 years, off and on. We had some good days working on the Earth's space elevator. That was 2001, 2, and 3. Before there was a company called Liftport Group. I was part of the NASA Institute for Advanced Concepts research team on the space elevator. Then fast forward 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we concentrated on carbon nanotube technology and the material sciences for working on the space elevator. And then also, ultimately that didn't work. The materials that we were working on ultimately did not pay off. But we put a lot of time and effort into it, and pretty happy for the things that we learned. But then we changed gears to focus on the mechanical processes of building an elevator. And that worked out pretty well. We climbed as high as a mile for just a few hours. We had a longer endurance system that was up for 60 days. It was only a couple hundred feet, but it went for 60 days. And we were just at that point where we were marrying high altitude and long endurance. We called that HAIL. We were just about to put those two systems together when the economy crashed. This is 2007 going into 2008, and our company closed. So we have some interesting legacy working on different space projects. Fast forward, I worked on 2 different venture capital projects, one in Greece and one in Canada, neither of which worked. But I thought maybe that was a path to work on the space elevator. Fast forward, we restarted the company. We ran a Kickstarter in 2012. Some would say it was successful. I would say it was pretty unsuccessful in some important ways. We asked for $8,000. We got $110,000, and that sounds like a win, but I assure you there's enough problems in there that it counts as a negative going forward. Love that community, though. Really, the folks that supported us, I'm very grateful to the folks that did and continue to support us. And then fast forward, we restarted, like if you're counting, it's kind of version number 3, restarted focus exclusively on the moon back in 2017, 2018. And that's when we really got kind of the new current version of Liftport. When the pandemic hit, that plague just about killed the company again. We wound up having to pivot away from working on the elevator. We haven't worked on the elevator for years, but hold that thought. And then we switched over to doing online conferences. We did 27 online conferences. We got pretty good at media systems, this kind of stuff. Hosted hundreds of pretty amazing guests, 3 and 4-star generals, senior administration at NASA, at many commercial space companies, technical analysts, both with the US government and across the world. Lots and lots of venture capitalists, because that's really important to kind of see where the money is coming from. And then as the pandemic shifted again, we've mostly, not entirely, but mostly stopped doing online conferences and have shifted once again to focus on these podcasts. So you can catch our shows at the DareGreatly space on Spotify, and over at our YouTube channel, we've got 500,000 views. We've got several hundred hours, maybe 400, maybe 500 hours of content on our youtube.com/Liftport channel. So Definitely share, like, and subscribe. We'd love to have your support and your connections over on those two platforms. We are beginning to do some interesting stuff with social media. We've had some great conversations internally with our team, Leah and Rachel, focusing on building out a newsletter and some other products coming out. So that's been pretty fun. We put a lot of effort into that. And then finally, focusing on our channel, the DareGreatly show now has, we're operating twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays. And really happy to announce that tomorrow, our client, the Mars Society, is going to host Red Planet Live. We'll be in the background. You won't see us, but we'll be there managing the ones and zeros to make sure everything goes smoothly. Red Planet Live and the Mars Society has been running this for almost 6 months now. They've got Emily Calandrelli tomorrow, so she's epic. I really recommend her. She is pretty remarkable, talented, really good at just the job of being a science communicator. So we've had her on our shows before. This one's going to be a little bit different and kind of special. So I'm just going to be in the background, but I'm really looking forward to this. This is going to be a great show. We've got Cislunar Industries, Gary Coleman. He's been on our show once or twice, about twice or three times. He actually did a special event with us about a year ago. So we're looking forward to getting a catch up with him. We've got Les Johnson at the end of the month. He ran NASA's Advanced Concepts office out of Marshall for almost 10 years, Marshall Space Flight Center. So super excited to have him. His day job at NASA is one thing that's pretty interesting, but his two side hustles as a ongoing author with Baen Books. I think he's published 6 or 7 or 8 sci-fi stories, and then another 3 or 4 or 5 technical nonfiction books. So we're going to have him in at the end of the month. The folks from Gravitics, the folks from Starfish, the folks from Integrated Space are on the to-do list. So we've got some really great guests, and I'm really glad that these are starting to come together. So definitely check this out Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. Tuesday with Emily Calandrelli for the Mars Society, but then also going forward, the Space Frontier Foundation is hosting their Pioneers of Space Commercialization show. We just had some really great guests. I'm not supposed to say who they are just yet. I keep making that mistake. So sometimes I say it and sometimes I don't. And this time I caught myself. But amazing guests. That's all I'm going to tell you right now. It's amazing guests. The one that we're going to release, not tomorrow, but next week, you're really going to want to listen to. You're going to want to watch that one. Okay. With that, sorry, it was a really long preamble. What we do with our shows, we have 3 kinds of shows. We have policy or documents show. That's what today is. We do news wrap up and review, and then we do guests. Right? Those are our 3 show formats. We focus on the money of space, the commercialization of space. So we look at that intersection of infrastructure, policy, and capital. So that's what we're looking at today. Sorry, this is a really long preamble. I felt like we haven't done a preamble for a while, and from new people, I wanted them to know some of the background. So we're going to jump into it, and what we're talking about, some of y'all have seen this before. This is now the 3rd time we have reviewed this, but it's a new document, and I think this stuff is really important, so we're going to keep doing it. This is the Space Capital Quarterly Report. All right. So Space Capital, They have been around for a long time. I was offered a job back in 2007. Guillermo offered me a job to work with the Space Angels Network. So that would have been 2007 was the first time that they were really on my radar. Eventually, I'm not sure when they changed their name from Space Angels Network to Space Capital, but same folks doing just some tremendous work. So quarterly, they put this document out, and it is, I think, the best indication of what is actually happening in the space sector. And we on our team read it cover to cover as soon as it comes out. It came out this morning. Great coincidence. This is what we're going to be talking about today. We had a different show planned. I was going to do a news show, and did a complete 180 the moment that I found out that this thing was available. So pretty exciting about that. I'm going to do this a little bit out of order than what I normally do. So we're going to go straight to the back of this thing first. There's some parts I want to read off verbatim. I want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. All right, this piece. This section hasn't really gotten enough attention here, so I'm just going to read parts of it about this report. The framework for this report is based on the GPS playbook. We're going to post a link to that in a minute, which explores how space-based technology generates trillions of dollars in economic value and some of the largest venture outcomes. We believe that the history of GPS provides a framework for understanding how space-based technology has become a platform for innovation on a global scale. Specifically, the development of technology layers on top of space-based infrastructure and the distribution of data for mass adoption, which unlocks thousands of unique applications. The data from this report is available on our interactive format on our website. I love this tool. This is a great tool. So first, I'm going to copy the GPS playbook. Just give me a second here. This document is really worth reading. I really recommend it. It is a fascinating look at the history and development, not just from the technological perspective, but from the money that GPS generates. I would say, and I think this is a pretty strong statement, but I would say that Western civilization, global civilization depends on that network of a little over 20, sometimes 30 satellites in the sky. Every pizza you'll ever get delivered is dependent on it. Every Amazon package, every Uber ride, every transaction done with a credit card, debit card, at the gas pump, it doesn't matter. If you want to move money anywhere in the 21st century, if you want just-in-time delivery of your packages, and that's not to mention the military applications, the military developments that have come together as a result of GPS. And that's not to mention if you're a hiker in the backcountry, and that's not to mention, shipping and trucking all around the world. Global logistics depend on this system. Now, there are two other systems and another one in development. China is working on one. Europe has one called Galileo. Russia has one that the name is escaping me. Okay, so there are four. There are three that are in different stages of development, and then the GPS system is the big daddy that's been running for more than 2 decades. So take a look at this report. It's really important. It sets the foundation of, and kind of gives you a crystal ball of where we've come from and where we're going. So if you want to have a good idea about where we're going, in the commercialization of space, take a look at this because it is the only thing that's been out there. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. Baidu is the Chinese system, and GLONASS is the Russian system. Boy, you know what? It's great having you, Dr. Plata. I really like having you like back me up on stuff. I just think it's helpful. So appreciate it, buddy. So there's 4 systems, but the only thing that's been in space commercially for any length of time. Now there are, the outliers, the original satellite companies. They've been operating since the late 60s. But either those have gone out of business, closed, or been merged into other larger organizations. So it's really hard to get good numbers on that. Whereas GPS has been discrete enough, long enough that it's easier to understand. So I know we're supposed to be talking about like what's happening this quarter in the money of space. But I think it's really important, and we haven't, this section, this paragraph has been in all the other, we've done this 3 times. This is the 3rd time we've done this report. It was the first thing that we started when we started doing these shows. We use this report as one of our guideposts. But we haven't really put the emphasis on this GPS playbook. So I really want make sure everybody knows that that's there. It's useful. It's an important document. The other thing I want to showcase is, and we've done this already, so we're not going to dig into it in as much depth, but I want to showcase their dashboard. So let's see. Let's get some links here. Here's how you get into the dashboard. This is worth spending some time on. I care about this piece, right? Lunar development over the last, let's say, we've been in business this long. So of all the things that are going into space, only $700 million has gone into the lunar development. And since I just gave you the preamble, so since the new version of Liftport has been alive, there has not been a lot of money going into space. Going to commercial development of the moon. Sorry, I totally messed that up. Commercial development of the moon. I'm actually not sure who these companies are. I want to look them up, and I don't actually have a good way of figuring that out. So that's a little bit of a mystery. There are some you can take some guesses at, Astrobotics, Orbital Outpost, things like that. Those are companies that we know are in the Space Capital portfolio. But this database is really worth looking at. We're probably going to come back to it if we have enough time. There's some stuff I want to talk about, but I recommend that people just go to the Space Capital site and review it for themselves. I don't think we're going to be able to go into it today. Not much anyway. Let me come back to the core report. What are all these notes? Hold on, I don't know what these notes are. Give me a second here. Who is writing us? Doug. Okay. The things you mentioned before. Yeah, that one's good. Go. Doug, always great. I'm just going to show that to everybody. We were able to do all of the things that you mentioned before GPS. Is a really good idea for us. Is it really a good idea for us to put ourselves at risk of a single point failure, i.e. GPS? I don't bring this out very often. I've shown you directly when we were having lunch one time but this is a challenge coin from the chief scientist of U.S. Space Force, and we have had exactly that conversation, and he's had it with lots of other people, so that's not special, but it was special to me. But you're right, you're absolutely right. Do we want to put all of our eggs in one GPS basket? I think that's an important question. It is the reason why Europe is building their own Galileo system. And certainly China has been using the US GPS system for a long time, but militarily we have the ability to turn that off. And they didn't want their systems dependent on a system that we could turn off. So pretty interesting. And that's why there are multiple systems out there. What is going to be fascinating is when somebody figures out the set of like 4 chips in a single cell phone that's able to take 4 different signals from 4 different networks and give you centimeter style accuracy, because all those other systems are going to be open also. I think that's what's going to make the revolution of self-driving cars happen, by the way. But that's a whole other conversation. Well, thank you, Mr. Martin. I appreciate that. Thanks. I think you're new to our show, so I'd love to chat with you a little bit about that. Appreciate that. Thanks. Doug, you're asking about whether stuff is being spent in Starship. Let me restate that. Is the money spent in Starship money spent towards the moon? A report like this is not going to give you that information. It just isn't. I'm going to go into it a little bit more detail, so maybe that will answer your question. But this isn't the kind of report that's going to get you that information. To my knowledge, there is no report out there that's going to get you, that's going to answer that question. I think that data is probably very proprietary to SpaceX only, and they're not sharing. All right, let me get back to the report itself. It was great having the questions, though. That makes this a much more interesting show when y'all do that. So thank you. Okay, so GPS Playbook and their website. Definitely take a look at both of those things. I think they are important to kind of set the tone. Their website, I can get lost in it. In fact, I did get lost into it. I was supposed to be doing prep for today's show, and I went down the rabbit hole looking at their metrics. So, all right. Again, I'm sticking with the end of the document first because I think they're saying some stuff that's really important, and I want that to be context for when we dig deeper into this. So, pardon me, but I'm just going to go ahead and read another block of text. With another 6 billion, I love that number, by the way. Think about that. 6 billion a quarter is the same as the NASA budget. $24 billion so the private sector is putting in as much as the entirety of the NASA budget. And the NASA budget is spread super thin because it's sending probes to Enceladus, it's monitoring robots on Mars, it's got its moon missions, it's got its climate change missions, it's got its missions focused on the sun. NASA is doing an awful lot of stuff with their $24 billion, but this $24 billion, I'm extrapolating, right? Last quarter plus this quarter, assuming even 6 billion times 4, the private sector is putting in as much money as the entirety of NASA's budget. And coming back to the chief scientist, that's one of the things that I told Dr. Mosier back in 2018. It's one of the reasons why he talks to me is because I am paying attention to stuff that was not on his radar. He did not believe me when I first talked to him that the private sector had a budget equal to or larger than the original Space Force budget. And it is still true that the private space sector budget is larger than the combination of the early days of Space Force and a couple of years ago NASA's budget. So I think it's remarkable. It's going to stay that way. The commercial sector is putting in a lot of money here, and so I'm going to continue reading. With another $6 billion invested in 91 companies in Q2, total equity investment across the space economy has now reached $280.5 billion. So it's crossed over the $250 million number by a ways. It actually crossed it last year. Put that in perspective. Last year's revenues from the space industry were $478 billion. So revenues are just about double all the money that's gone into this sector since 2014, right? 1,779, I'm going to simplify that and call it 1,800 unique companies since 2014. Over the past 6 quarters, investments in applications has dwindled. We're going to talk about applications in a minute. While infrastructure has been more resilient. That makes me feel good. I want infrastructure to be more resilient. VC continues to be the largest source of capital for space companies in 2023, with $2.7 billion invested in 145 companies, accounting for 33% of the total investment and 81% of the rounds. So VCs are the folks that have got the money and the power. It is interesting if you kind of like work that backwards. Where is the other 66% coming from? It's private equity. The SpaceX round that just happened because they pulled in private equity from a lot of varied sources. So not VC. So I think that was a little misleading. They're like, it's the largest source of capital, except that it's kind of not the largest source of capital. Depends on how you look at it, right? If you look at it as 145 companies, yeah, that's definitely true. Like they have a wider diversity for investments. Investors realized $9.1 billion in value through 14 exits. That sentence, frankly, is kind of surprising to me. That is almost shocking to me, because up until recently, you were not talking about exits in this sector at all. There were some rare black swan events. Google bought a company 10 years ago. That was an exit. There's little exits here and there. There have been quite a few roll-ups. We're going to talk about them in a minute. But up until recently, in the last year or two, you didn't talk about exits in this industry. Everybody was waiting for that Netscape moment that said, okay, this stuff is real and investors can put money in with the expectation that they can get money out. That's new, and I had no idea until I read this report. I had no idea it was $9 billion in 14 exits. So that's the biggest piece of news to me of this quarter. Despite strong market headwinds, breakthrough technologies and exceptional teams continue to secure funding. Notably, and this is for you, Doug, as Starship is expected to pass critical testing this year, the space economy is entering a new phase of infrastructure development. As long-term investors in this category, we actively seek founders who are building for this new future. So they are as excited. I'm wearing my Starship Singularity T-shirt on purpose because I felt like it was relevant to the show today. They're talking about recent advancements in AI are enhancing capabilities of companies with distribution and application layers, particularly within the geointelligence sector. We are actively investing in entrepreneurs who harness space data and cutting-edge technologies to revolutionize global industries. So, I mean, that last piece is kind of a pitch for them to tell people, hey, we have a portfolio, we're doing some cool stuff. They are doing some cool stuff. And hats off to them for doing a good job. They were very ambitious and very prescient to invest in astrobotics and lunar outpost. I actually don't know all of these companies. I'm a big fan of Leo. But they put real skin in the game really early on. So again, let me kind of, before we get into the rest of the numbers here, they talk about how they break it up: infrastructure, distribution, and applications. We just read a report a couple weeks ago. I think it was from Aerospace Corp, or maybe it was, God, I read so many reports, I can't remember who it was. But they're talking about, there's here, there's near, and there's there, right? That's how they broke it up of, on the Earth, Leo and Geo, and further out. So everybody kind of breaks up their reports in different flavors. A lot of it's the same data, just looked at through a different lens or different sieve. So these folks, Space Capital, infrastructure, distribution, and applications. I really like that. I think it's solid. And that's the lens that they view all of their reporting. So this is kind of how they break it up, like who's in launch, satellites. This is a 2-page graphic. So who's doing stations, logistics, and industrials. So this is a subset of their this stations, lunar, logistics, industrials is a subset of their infrastructure sector. But this is them breaking it up, right? Applications, distribution, and infrastructure. Infrastructure, hardware and software to build, launch, and operate space-based assets. Distribution, hardware and software to connect, process, and manage data. And applications, specialized hardware and software that utilizes data from space-based assets. I predict that no one thinks of Uber as a space company, right? I predict applications are just going to kind of go away, kind of as an edge case, in the same way that nobody names a company dogfood.com anymore, where the .com is relevant to the company's name and brand. There's no such thing as an internet company anymore. All companies have an internet strategy. I think eventually there's going to be, such a ubiquity of data that you're not going to have dedicated space data companies. There will be layers where they distribute data all the time. Of course, that's going to happen. But I really think that this will eventually just kind of compress into distribution and hardware. That's how I think the market's going to flow. Where it doesn't matter if you're a software company using a mobile phone platform or a data analytics company counting cars in Walmart parking lots, that the applications component is just going to compress, and we're not going to pay as much attention to it because it's just going to be part of the economy, not the space economy. I hope that was clear. I've struggled with how I described that a couple times. All right, let us, this is a little hard to do on a screen, so just kind of bear with me for a moment. Thank you. The report I was looking for, that I was trying to remember, was Deloitte. We reviewed them a couple, maybe 3 or 5 weeks ago or something. Thanks, Leah. If you have that link up, just post that or not. Okay. I'm not sure what you just were doing there. Okay. let me come back to this. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the front of the document and kind of work our way through it. I just wanted to go through the back side of it because there were some important pieces there. Let me get to the parts I want to talk about. Of course, they're going to talk about the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. I'm not going to name them because I don't think they'd want to be named. But there was a lot of frustration in the space venture capital community over the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. It had unexpected ripple effects that went through our whole community. And I was surprised by it. It didn't impact us because we're not funded that way. But friends of mine weren't sure they were going to make payroll for a little while. And nothing does a new economy bad like missing payroll, right? Not just one company missing payroll, but all the space companies could have missed payroll. It was pretty shocking. It was pretty surprising. So given that's how we started, that was a little rough. Hiring across the space economy dropped nearly 70% since its peak in May 2022. While a number of well-funded companies trim staff, founders are proving they can do more with less, sending a positive signal to private market investors. That is absolutely the key. I have talked to several founders and funders in the last maybe the last 4 or 5 months. They are all saying across the board, do more with less, and that our industry is responding has been seen as a really positive cycle. And the companies that aren't able to do that are in trouble. So that's kind of necessary in this environment. But I kind of want to say no big deal, because our industry has been starved for cash since the day we started 30 years ago, right? The Space Frontier Foundation's celebrating their 35th anniversary. Every commercial company in the last 35 years has been starved for cash. That there's billions of dollars in the sector now, hundreds of billions of dollars in the sector now, doesn't mean they're not starved for cash, because that's how VCs deploy their capital. They want to make a solid return on their investment, and so they're not going to flood the market, flood the economy with cash. So even in the best days, there wasn't a lot, and now when we've spread the capital amongst 1,800 companies, by the way, many of them are out of business already. It's not a surprise that when we were told as an industry to tighten our belts, we just did that. We just tightened our belts and kept moving forward. So I'm not very surprised by this. Apparently it did surprise other people. Maybe other people are not, CEOs who, the title of our show, DareGreatly, is about the man in the ring who, takes the hits and keeps fighting, right? So I wasn't as surprised about this as other folks seem to be. But so we've had 183 rounds. $8 billion year to date. Now, this belies my comment I said earlier about $6 billion this quarter. That means only $2 billion last quarter. So my comments and enthusiasm about being equivalent to a NASA's budget. I still maintain that we're gonna hit big numbers towards the end of this year. So I'm gonna stick with that prediction here. Like the last quarter's numbers, there's a lot of money going into very small companies, right? 63% of all the money, 2/3 of all the money is in the either seed or Series A. That's consistent from last quarter and the quarter before that, the Q4 of 2022. It's consistent. That's how VCs operate. They put a lot of bets on the table to see who's able to best manage their capital, and then they redouble investments in Series Bs and Cs for the ones that are showing promise. So that's kind of normal. This is not a surprise. If you looked at any other sector, it's going to be a somewhat similar graphic. Probably more money, right? 8 billion seems like a lot to us, but it's not a lot to if you're a mobile game or making a movie, right? The movie industry. So it seems like a lot to us only because we have been hungry for so long. Nothing I'm going to talk about there. This is a great chart. I really like this chart. If there's $280 billion, most of it is going into applications. A small section of it is going into distribution, and a much larger section is going into infrastructure. We're gonna definitely dive into infrastructure more than the other ones, because it's kind of closer to home for the things that we look at, that we're interested in. So just bear with me. This seems odd to me, this graphic. I would have thought there were more deals. So the number of rounds seems a little light for this far into the year. I would have expected that number to be higher, so I'm a little surprised by that. But I remain optimistic for the rest of 2023. I think the number of rounds is going to start creeping up. Super relevant, this section prior, so here's your graphic on time. First GPS launches in 78, first commercial GPS in 84, 2001. GPS 1 supports launch of GPS on mobile devices. So that was the beginning. And that's kind of what made what we now know as the iPhone and your smartphone capabilities even possible. So there was only just a 7-year gap between this, right? And since the beginning of the iPhone, basically redefined what a phone was, what a device in your pocket, a computer in your pocket was, all of this other stuff happened, right? I'm always a fan of Planet Labs, right? That they can take a picture of the world every day. I just find that remarkable. So I like this chart. I like how they tie money in with time. I think that's well done. Infrastructure. This is where we're going to spend most of our time, keeping in mind that infrastructure is 62 billion out of 280 billion. This is where the money's being spent. So again, this is only a partial year, but we're halfway through. So if you can if you can just say, okay, we're gonna double what we have, now we're looking at 220, 225 rounds. Sorry, dollars. I'm looking at the wrong chart. If this is $8 billion so far, doubling that gets us to 16 billion. No, that's not correct. My math is wrong. 12 billion. So kind of comes in here. That feels like it's in the right general range. So not equivalent to a NASA budget, but if you keep at the $6 billion level, then so that's what we're waiting for, right? We're waiting for the day when the commercial sector outpaces the government commitment to NASA. I'd love to have the piece of data that shows Space Force's budget, which has been an upward curve, plus NASA's budget, which is basically flat, plus NOAA, and maybe NRO, and put those four budgets together on the chart, just to kind of showcase how much weight the private capital market has. Next chart. There's nothing in here that's like really jumps out at me the way other stuff has. It's kind of some of the stuff we've already talked about. Once again, Series A and Seed takes up almost 3/4 of all the capital. It's in Series A and Seed, and that is consistent. That one does surprise me a little bit, especially because this is the hardware side of space. A lot of the other stuff is applications. That's the digital side of space. Speaking in generalizations, this is the hardware side, and I know from our original days trying to run a nanotechnology lab, we had a choice once where we had to put $500,000 into buying a microscope, but that was a microscope that needed a full-time staff and a maintenance contract just to exist. We didn't get any value out of it, right? And that's the problem with hardware companies, right? They take a lot of money. We did not, by the way, make that investment. That was impossible. We put about $200,000 and $300,000 into our carbon nanotube development research, and then pulled the plug because we couldn't go any further without a lot more cash. But that's the thing, right? So all these folks, 75% of this money that's going into the sector, it's in Seed and Series A because you have to put a lot of money into hardware. So I am worried about that. I have been worried about that for a while. That again, we just talked about a cash-strapped space economy. If most of that money is going into the digital side, well, it's not that different than what's happening in Silicon Valley, right? It's cool to say, hey, there's $280 billion in this sector, but in the piece that actually gets hardware into the sky, it's a fraction of that. It's a fraction of that. And we have to kind of keep that in mind, that this is still the first baby steps of this industry. They have taken the industry and they're like, all right, launch is good. We got nearly 30 billion. We got satellites. That's good. We got nearly 30 billion. Remember, we're only talking about 62 billion. And they were like, well, roughly 60 billion of it is in two very well-defined industry sectors, launch and satellites. If anybody's heard me talk about the grand architecture, there's several stages to it. The first stage is launch and satellites, and I'm like, checkbox, we're really pretty good at that at this point. So then what's left? You only have, $2.5-ish billion to go into the emerging industries. And that's the area that I am most interested in when we talk about lunar development, Martian development, cislunar space economy, building out space stations, the stuff that I am personally interested in. If infrastructure is only 62 billion out of 280, and the stuff that I'm interested in is only, call it 2.5 billion out of 60 billion, this is 1% of the space economy. The piece that I particularly care about is only 1% of the invested capital. 2.5 billion of 280 billion ish, right? Like that's how I'm getting my math. 1% of the whole space economy is the piece that I'm personally paying attention to and interested in. So we got a ways to go. We're not there yet. I want us to be there. I want good things to happen, but we are not there yet. And I really believe, and I bet my career, I bet my future on this piece. I believe that this is the stuff that's going to change everything about what it is to live on Earth, what it is to be a human being, what it is to be a critter that has a pulse anywhere on this planet. That this smallest piece of the things we're talking about, 1% of a $280 billion space capitalization, this is the stuff that's going to change the next century. So that's what I'm betting on. That's what I'm hoping for. And it breaks out into a bunch of different pieces. I hope you can read some of it. Launch, 74 rounds, space stations. I don't know how they got 98 rounds for space stations. There are not that many space stations that I'm aware of. It's not individuals. I know that that's not true, but I'm aware of about 15 space stations. I could give you a list. I made a list at the beginning of last year, but there have been new entrants. I like this. I like seeing this. Kepler is kind of a darling of the space economy, right? Because they started out as, I think, a Y Combinator or a Techstars level company that went through the incubator process. They went through several incubators beforehand. They went out to they created a destruction lab, I think, in Toronto. And they've just like step by step, they have used the Silicon Valley model that has funded all of these other digital technology companies. They have used that model and done a really good job and taken it into hardware. And so hats off to those folks. I genuinely do not know how they did that, and I would love to know that. I'm meeting with some folks in the coming weeks that have done a similar path, so I can learn how to do that for our own company here. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Again, exits. So 8 billion in infrastructure exits. So I showed you earlier, there have been $9 billion in exits this quarter. 8 of them happened in the infrastructure sector. That is really important to pay attention to, right? One, that validates the investor thesis that this is a place to go, but also companies that are in trouble, that are struggling, are being bought out, eaten up by better capitalized, better operated companies. So that's a thing that's happening also. It's called a roll-up strategy. A company comes in, gets a lot of cash, just a pile of cash, and then they go out and cherry pick the best struggling small companies to build into this larger company. It's a very effective strategy depending on where you are in the food chain, and it is what is driving most of these exits. So, but it does say that the sector can make money for the people in the right place at the right time. I'm not saying they all do. I'm just saying that 8 of the 9 billion in exits happened in this one sector, in the infrastructure hardware sector. Okay. And this is emerging industries, right? This is my favorite topic. Most of the money is coming from venture, but angel plays a pretty big part of it, and corporate venture plays a part of it. I don't know what this other section is. They've got an asterisk, but I haven't followed up on it. And then this, if you like that's the year we're kind of paying attention to. This is the year we're like, oh, finally, it's gonna happen for our industry, and then crash off a cliff. Nothing. But this is promising, right? And this is why I said I have hope for third and fourth quarter this year, because 2023 is equal to all of the stuff that happened in 2022. So this gives me some hope for the rest of this year. It's not hope like this. It's not hope like 2021, where like, whoa, maybe our dreams are going to come true. Nope, not just yet. But still, I have some optimism for the rest of this year, and I think it's going to be a pretty good capital raising environment for these companies, these emerging industry companies. No surprise, most of it is happening in the United States. This section of like 80% in the US and 14% in Japan, interesting to note, the companies that I'm thinking of in Japan, SpaceForge and iSpace, have US presences. And so I don't know how much, maybe the company is being capitalized in Japan, but a lot of that cash is being spent in the United States. I think that's not reflected in this chart. So I think that actually strengthens the case for more stuff happening in the US than is apparent in this chart. Because when the dollars are added up, they are being, according to this chart, allocated to Japan where the headquarters are, but then those on this chart, that's how they're categorizing everything. So we're talking about, where's my number? Hold on a second. Yeah, we're talking about $5.5 billion over the length from all the way back to 2014 till now. $5 billion of a $62 billion budget, $5 billion of a $280 billion budget. There's not a lot of money in this sector. Not a lot. And you can all point to, where is it? You can all point to space stations getting the bulk of it, right? So $280 billion in the total economy, $62 billion in the infrastructure, the hardware side of it. The emerging sector only has 5.5, and space stations is getting 3 of that. That only leaves $2.5 billion for all of this other stuff. And this is, so like you can just see this pie just shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And so it's no wonder that, you know, companies like Liftport that want to do something super ambitious, which is build out a lunar elevator and a space station, there's not much money in the capital pool for ambitious ideas like ours. So it's just This is a reality check. I can't say it's always good news. I do like some of the pieces in here that we are seeing more money in this sector this year than all the combined of last year. So I think that's important. So we're getting there. This is going to happen. It's going to take some time. Got to be patient. The rest of the sector is doing really, really well. And so hats off to those folks, because we can't do our jobs if they don't get their jobs done. So deep space satellites, debris mitigation, space situational awareness, construction, energy, all of these things, they're happening, but they're super small amounts of money because the risks are so high, because they're hardware and that's expensive. So we're just going to have to be patient in this industry. We're getting there. It's happening, but it's not happening fast. All right. I'm not going to cover the rest of this. I covered the pieces that were really important here. This is a great document, definitely worth the read. And with that, I'm going to close out the show. Let me come back to our show here. Okay. Oh yeah, hey, this is an important comment. Back to that chart, I'm not going to find it right now, but China is only 7% of the infrastructure spend compared to the US's 69%. That's a big deal. Tompkins, sorry, I didn't have my glasses on. Dr. Tompkins, that's really important. On our show a couple days ago, Wednesday last week, we had a report from General Miley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest general at the Pentagon, talking about this new way of competing with China that's not direct, we have bullets, you have bullets situation, but more how do we maneuver on this global, not chessboard, but go board. And, looking at this, China is 7% of the infrastructure spend compared to the US's 69%. So, new hardware. That's really important. Let me see if I can just find that. I know we're going slightly over time, so just bear with me here. You all know I like really being on time for this thing. So if I can't find it quick, I'm going to close it, but let's try. I cannot find it fast. Merging. Yeah, right here. 69%. China is 7%, right? So that's pretty great. It is not broken down in that much detail here in this chart. You can find it on their dashboard. Let me see if I can get that to happen quickly. No, the dashboard doesn't have that level of clarity, I don't think. Maybe it does. Give me a second. I'm doing some quick work here. Okay, let me show this. Another comment. China is really building a lot of infrastructure. New companies that are very closely allied with their national priorities, funded quasi from the state. I've broadened this out a little. 2022 is the most recent data in here. I've just pulled out lunar logistics, And it's got US, Japan, Israel, UK, and Canada. It's important to note that both Japan and Israel sent missions to the moon that were largely private missions, so that accounts for the bulk of it. China is not on this chart yet, so definitely watch for that coming up. Okay. With that, we're going to go ahead and close down. Thanks, everybody, for being a part of this. This is a really lively discussion. I was really glad to see that. Sometimes we worry about this stuff because it could get pretty dry sometimes. So thanks a lot. Appreciate y'all. Bye-bye. Have a good night.